Hello, welcome to Ballyhoo Creations. This video is going to show you how to make one of these stuffed ghosts using the machine embroidery designs from ballyhoocreations.com. I've already hooped some no-show mesh stabilizer and I'm stitching out the first color, which on your machine will look either blue or purple depending on the brand of machine you're running, and that will stitch the placement outline showing where to put the fabric over the ghost and also the cutting line that'll come later. So now I've got the outline stitched and I'm going to place some stretch fabric on top and make sure that all of those stitches are covered. Just kind of straighten it out. I'm just floating it here. Stretch fabric is usually pretty grippy, so you don't need to pin it or even tape it, but if you want that excess out of the way, you can take that. Put the hoop back on the machine and now I'm going to stitch the facial features of the ghost. I would suggest a dark colored thread like a black, a dark gray, or a dark brown, something like that for the facial features. I should mention that there are 3 different faces and 3 different body shapes for the ghost pack. One of them is a freebie. The freebie is also included in the 3-pack. Go ahead and trim those little jump threads off of the face. And this part is optional, but I like to add a little tiny bit of stuffing into the facial features on these stuffies to give them a little extra dimension. I call it a false or a faux soft sculpture. Just take a little wad of stuffing, and I'm using some very thin hemostats here. You could use tweezers or a small stuffing stick, something like that. I like to put a little bit of stuffing in the nose there. And I'm also going to give this one some cheeks, so I'm just taking another little tiny bit of stuffing. I'm going to kind of roll it up into a ball, and do be careful, they're slippery, they get away from you. Now I'm going to use a glue stick and just swipe that little ball of stuffing across the glue stick and then press it down onto the stabilizer and cover it with the fabric again. I'm going to do that on both sides, and this one has cheeks. You can use this technique for the nose, for cheeks, for a chin, and also sometimes a brow line over those eyebrows. You can do just like a little line, like a little worm of stuffing, and put it under there. With that face finished, I'm going to go ahead and straighten out the fabric again and place the top layer of fabric . Usually I have 2 separate pieces, but in this case I had one and I just folded it over. You can do that too, or use 2 separate pieces. Just make sure that the original placement line that you stitched in the first step is all covered by both the front and back fabric, or both layers of fabric. And I'm also going to put a little bit of stabilizer over the body of the ghost. You don't have to do this step. Oftentimes I forget to do it completely, but I do like to have a little bit of stabilizer just on the body and not on the arms. So if you're stitching one of the ghosts that has arms, you only need about 2 to 3 inches wide, and just center it in your hoop to go over the ghost body. If you get it up in the arms and you have 2 layers of fabric plus 2 layers of stabilizer, it makes it too hard to turn those arms inside out. A little bit trickier, so I like to just stabilize the back of the body and leave those arms free. Put the hoop with that whole sandwich back on the machine, and I'm going to stitch the seams. This one is going to go around in a clockwise direction first and do the running stitch seam, and then it's going to turn around and go in the opposite direction to do a double stitch seam. There will be an opening on the side where you can turn and stuff the ghost. So that's all normal. Just don't want you to freak out that it's doing the same thing over again or anything like that. That's normal, it's supposed to do that. It's a double stitch seam with an opening. The difference between the stuffies and the felties, because I offer both designs, the stuffies that we're showing here have this running stitch that's double stitched and it has a side opening. The felties have a complete stitch, there's no opening, and it's a triple bean stitch instead of this running stitch, so it's a little bit different. But otherwise the shape and the faces of both ghosts are the same between the stuffies and the felties, and the applique, which is actually the same as the felties. Move the project from the hoop, and now it's time to cut away the excess. So if you look at the back of the project on the stabilizer, there's that original placement line, and that's the guide for cutting out the seam allowance. Do be careful that you don't cut the running stitches or the inside stitches. Just cut the outer stitches and just on the inside so that you clip away all those threads. You can see how I'm doing it right there. And the little lines that get into the corners, those are to show you where to snip all the way into those corners. That'll give you the best result when you turn this inside out. But be careful not to, again, clip your inside seams there. The reason we can do such a very small seam allowance on these characters is because, first of all, we're using a stretch fabric so it doesn't fray like a woven fabric does. Also, we've got the stabilizer in the seam, so that's going to help hold it together as well. So you can do this very close. It's about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And there's an extra tab there on the side where you're going to stuff it. I'm going to use these 5-inch hemostats, and these are actually the pair that I bought from Walmart in the fishing section, believe it or not. So I'm just showing they do actually work to turn the arms inside out. You want to get them all the way up into the top of the hand and open them up a little and use a fingernail or something to just press that seam into the hemostats and then close it. And if you pull from the bottom like that, you're going to have a really hard time. You need to squeeze at the very top, at that tip of the hand. Just gently squeeze and then start pulling the hemostats. And that should get the arm, the turning started, and then once it's started, you can pull. Don't ever pull or don't tug too hard on those hemostats. You don't want to rip your hands or any part of that ghost. Doing it again, open those hemostats, push the seam allowance in there, clamp it down, and then squeeze at the top and just pull and work your way down. It takes a little practice to get the arms or any kind of small tube turned inside out, but after you do it a little bit, it's kind of a second nature kind of thing. It's a skill that comes with practice, so just keep at it. If you have stabilizer or you have too many layers of fabric in there, it can be harder to do. Some people have told me using fleece helps them because it's kind of a slippery fabric, so you could try that. A thin fabric like the stretch knit, I find that very easy to turn inside out as well. And I'm doing the same thing with the head of the ghost. Just poke that seam into the hemostats and then turn it inside out. Once I get it enough out, then just use my hands to finish it off. I do strongly suggest that you turn the arms inside out first, then the head, then the rest of the body. If you try to turn the body inside out first and then try to dig those arms out, it's going to be much harder. So do it in this order. Hands first, then the head, then the rest of the body. Once I've got the ghost turned inside out, I like to use the hemostats or some other dull object. You don't want anything sharp like scissors. Something dull like these hemostats have a square nose. This step is optional, but I do like to have some wire in the arms because when you pose them, you can move their arms around and it just gives them a lot more character. I usually use a pipe cleaner, but this time I'm going to try some floral wire, and I found that it works well too, but I think pipe cleaner is a little stiffer and holds a better pose than the floral wire. But whatever you have, you can use in there. Just make sure that the edges aren't sharp. You don't want that to poke through the hands. So I wire the arms first, and then I go ahead and stuff the ghost. You can see there's a little bit of extra wire, so go ahead and poke it up into the body, and then when you pull on it, It's all done. For a small project like this, you don't want to use big balls of stuffing. You want to just use small wads, a little bit at a time. And I find it's easier to start with the head, just work your way down, and then once I get the chest done, then I will go and put some pellets or something weighted in the bottom if I want them to sit on a shelf. I find that pellets or rice or something like that is a good filler so that they will stand up nicely. If you're doing something where you don't want pellets in the bottom, you don't have to. You can just use regular stuffing instead for the whole thing. I typically don't stuff the arms. I like them with just the wiring or the pipe cleaner in there. That's enough of a stuffing for the arms, and I kind of like the slouchy arms too, but you can stuff the arms if you want to do that. I'm going to put some pellets in the bottom because I like the weighted effect that gives these ghosts the ability to stand up on their own. Put them on a shelf. So I'm just going to use a little piece of cardstock, a little scrap that I have, and fold it into a cone, tape it closed, and that way I can get the pellets into that opening more easily. Typically, I like to spill pellets all over my workspace, but I thought for this video I'll try to clean it up a little bit. I'm just checking to see if I like how he's stuffed. He's kind of got a little limpy belly there, so I'm going to put a little bit more stuffing in there because when he's standing up, I don't want him to flop over. So you can just kind of squeeze on them, bend them a little bit, see where the spots are that you need to put a little bit more stuffing. He's more firm now, so I think I'm ready to close him up. I'm going to switch over to my glue mat or silicone mat so I don't get glue all over my work surface. And then I'm going to tuck in that little extra tab that we had on the side opening, get it nice and clean. And I like to use this Fabri-Fix glue. It's a clear glue that's meant for fabric. And I'll show you my technique for getting a nice clean glued seam. I've got a couple of little clamps here, mini clips. I'm going to go ahead and clip it closed. And I'm going to clean the nozzle of my glue bottle with a piece of scrap fabric, paper towel, something like that. So it's clean. I'm going to put that nozzle into the seam opening and get a little bead of glue and then squeeze that opening to wipe the glue off the nozzle. Does that make sense? Just squeeze a little glue out and pinch that fabric opening over the nozzle of glue to wipe it clean. And that way you won't get glue on the outside of the seam, it'll just stay on the inside, and just keep running that down. Squeeze a little bit out, pinch it closed, and use clips if you need to hold it in place. Just be careful you don't glue your clips onto the project because, yes, I have done that. I usually just let them sit for about a minute or two. This Fabri-Fix grabs pretty quickly and starts to set up, so I can take the clips off and the seam will be just fine. You get a nice clean seam that way. There we go. You can also hand stitch it with a ladder stitch or a whip stitch, whatever your preferred method is. Just do what you like to do. But I really like this glued seam. It's much faster than the hand stitching, and I don't poke myself with a needle. And the last step, I'm just going to tie a little piece of scrap fabric on this one. This is a little piece of gauze or cheesecloth or something. I like that little scrappy look. Just give him a little scarf. Tie it in a bow, put a ribbon on it, do whatever you want to do. This is your project. Embellish it however you want. This little ghost is all done. Hop over to ballyhoocreations.com for the machine embroidery designs for this project and a couple of other ghosts very much like him.